Usually when we talk about a system of justice, there's this underlying expectation of precision, right?
Right, yeah. Like it's supposed to be objective.
Exactly. It's almost like engineering. Like, if you get wrong, you look at the law, the rule book shows this clear, black and white line, and the judge just points to it and says, there it is, justice.
Yeah, I mean, we build these vast institutions because, well, we want the comfort of knowing society is categorized based on clear, knowable, and above all, impartial rules.
Right, like an X-ray machine.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, you put the facts in, the machine scans them without prejudice, and you get a clear picture of who's at fault. But then, you step into the modern family court system, or the labyrinth of campus tribunals, or even just a domestic dispute being handled by local police.
And suddenly the X-ray machine is, it's fundamentally broken.
Broken, or worse, right. That it was deliberately recalibrated to always show the exact same diagnosis, totally regardless of the patient. We're looking at a legal and institutional landscape that is, frankly, incredibly murky.
I would argue it goes far beyond murky. I mean, for the demographic we're discussing today, it is perceived as an active, hostile environment.
Yeah.
The presumption of innocence, which is, the absolute bedrock of Western jurisprudence, it just seems to evaporate depending on your gender.
It really does. And for a massive number of men navigating those waters, it feels less like a pursuit of justice and more like, walking into a highly coordinated trap.
Definitely.
So, to you, the listener, I want to set the stakes right out of the gate here. If you've ever felt that modern institutions, from family courts to the media, from universities to the police station, are systemically, fundamentally rigged against men, today's deep dive is exploring a highly controversial, explosive new survival manual written directly for you.
Yeah, it is a text that pulls absolutely zero punches.
Zero.
And frankly, it challenges some of the most deeply held conventions of modern society.
It really does.
Yeah.
Now, before we jump into the deep end, just a quick reminder to like and subscribe to the show right now so you never miss one of these deep dives.
Yep, hit that subscribe button.
Because today, we are reviewing a brand new, highly anticipated ebook. It's called Bias Against Men, The English Court's Betrayal of Fairness by Conrad Riker.
And it is a dense one.
Very. If you want to follow along or, dig into the raw templates and data after we talk, I highly recommend you check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the book. It is an ultra-long, incisive, and just fascinating battle manual.
Yeah, and we should note, Riker has written this specifically for a men's rights activist audience.
Right.
And for, red-pilled manosphere men, he focuses heavily on understanding the history of our institutions before they were, in his words, captured by feminists and Marxists.
Exactly. You should also follow the author directly at Conrad Riker on Substack.
Yeah, his Substack is very active. But we really need to lay out the mission of this specific deep dive clearly.
Good point.
Because the source material we are pulling from today is intense. Our goal here is to unpack the historical and current state of our institutions, specifically exploring Riker's core argument.
Which is that these pillars of society have been captured.
Right, captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies, fundamentally altering how justice is applied to men.
Yeah.
We're going to look at the mechanics of how this supposed capture actually functions in the real world.
Exactly. And here is a crucial disclaimer for you, the listener. Because this book contains highly politically charged content addressing the manosphere and men's rights activists, we are taking a strictly impartial stance today.
Yeah, we are not taking sides here.
We are not endorsing the viewpoints of the author, nor are we condemning them. We are simply reporting on the raw data, the arguments, and, frankly, the radical strategies contained in the source material to help you fully understand Conrad Riker's worldview.
And to understand why his specific strategies are resonating so powerfully with his audience right now.
Right. We are here to dissect the anatomy of his argument.
We're looking at the architecture of his claims. Like, how does he build this case, and what evidence is he using to support this feeling of systemic betrayal?
So let's start where everything usually starts, the money.
The money. Always the money.
Always. The financial mathematics of modern romance. Riker uses this incredibly provocative term to describe it. He calls it the marriage plantation.
It's a heavy term.
It's a very heavy term. I'm trying to wrap my head around the mechanics of this. What exactly is he arguing is happening financially when a man enters into a marriage today?
Well, what Riker does is he completely reframes the modern institution of marriage and divorce. The mainstream cultural narrative is that marriage is a partnership, right? An equal blending of lives and resources.
Dude, that's what we're all taught.
Right. But Riker argues that legally, That is a total fiction. He asserts that modern marriage is no longer a partnership, but rather a state-sponsored wealth redistribution mechanism.
Wow.
He claims that the system applies what he calls a toxic masculinity surcharge.
A surcharge, like a literal tax.
Essentially, yes. A hidden systemic fee levied against men simply for being born with a Y chromosome and participating in the economy. And he doesn't just, theorize about this in a vacuum. He anchors the claim in some very stark, verifiable data. He pulls from the UK Ministry of Justice statistics from 2022 to look at who is actually paying alimony, or spousal maintenance, as it's often called there.
I have those numbers right here, and they're staggering. He cites that 97% of alimony payers are men.
97%.
97%. Yet when you look at the other side of the equation, only 12% of the women receiving that alimony were actually the primary breadwinners in their households prior to the divorce.
So Riker looks at that 97 to 12 disparity and says, look, this cannot be explained away as a statistical anomaly.
Right, it's too huge.
Or even just a series of individual, unique judicial decisions. When a system produces a 97% bias in one direction, that is design. He argues that the courts have effectively weaponized evolutionary biology against men.
Let's unpack that biological angle,
Yeah.
because he brings up hypergamy, right?
Yes, hypergamy. If we look at the mechanics of evolutionary psychology, there is this well-documented concept called hypergamy. It's the biological instinct, primarily observed in females across many mammalian species, to seek mates of higher status.
Like greater physical protection or more abundant resources.
Exactly. Riker asserts that modern family courts have taken this ancient biological instinct and turbocharged it with state power.
Turbocharged it.
The courts are, in his view, legally mandating that working men continue to bankroll their ex-wives' new lifestyles, sometimes long after the relationship is completely dissolved.
He literally calls it Darwinism in reverse.
Yeah.
He argues that you have beta providers like the men working the 60-hour corporate jobs, legally forced to bankroll the alpha lifestyles of their exes, which often includes funding their exes' new partners.
And the book uses some incredibly vivid, albeit painful examples to illustrate how this wealth transfer actually looks in practice.
The human element of these stats is where Riker's argument really gains its emotional traction.
Oh, absolutely.
Take the example of Mark, an IT manager in London. According to the book, Mark is paying £2,300 every single month in post-tax alimony.
Post-tax.
Post-tax. And where's that money going? It's funding his ex-wife's self-discovery phase. She used the alimony to move to Bali and run a yoga retreat.
A yoga retreat in Bali. While Mark, the person whose labor is actually generating the wealth, is severely financially constrained. He's living in a small flat in a gray, rainy city, forced to keep grinding at a high-stress job just to meet the court-mandated payments.
And if he starves, he goes to jail.
He goes to jail.
And then there's Simon. Simon's situation is even more absurd. Simon's child support and spousal payments are effectively subsidizing his ex-wife's new boyfriend, who is an aspiring DJ in Ibiza.
You can't make this up.
The ex-wife uses Simon's money to pay the rent on the Ibiza villa, while Simon himself is surviving on cheap supermarket noodles in a tiny, damp bedsit apartment back in the UK.
Which is why Riker refers to this entire setup as a smash and grab with a gavel.
A smash and grab with a gavel. But let me play devil's advocate here for a second, because the mainstream legal consensus argues that maternal custody defaults and the subsequent alimony are based on the history of who was the primary caregiver.
Right, that's the standard argument.
The argument is that alimony protects a spouse who sacrificed their own career earning potential to raise the family. How does Riker argue against the simple, established concept of equitable compensation for lost career years?
The vital question. And Riker argues that the equitable compensation narrative is just a smokescreen.
Was it a smokescreen?
Yeah. He points to the fact that even in modern dual-income households, where the woman never sacrificed her career and actually out-earns the man, judges still overwhelmingly find ways to saddle the man with the financial burden, or at the very least deny him alimony.
Interesting.
So Riker's thesis is that the system isn't broken or making occasional mistakes in its pursuit of fairness.
So he believes the system is functioning exactly as intended.
Precisely. He is emphatic that the institution is operating at peak efficiency, according to a new ideological design. He claims that historical institutions of justice were methodically captured by feminist legal theory.
Wow.
Therefore, extracting wealth from an IT manager to fund a Bali yoga retreat isn't a glitch in the legal matrix. It is the matrix functioning flawlessly as a mechanism for what he explicitly terms feminist reparations.
Feminist reparations. So it's not a blind spot in the law, it's the target. The financial drain, the absolute extraction of wealth is the point.
That's his argument.
But that level of extraction is only possible if the entity enforcing it has immense, almost unchecked power. I mean, you can't force a man to pay for an Ibiza DJ unless you have the authority to destroy his life if he refuses.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the actual mechanics of the family courts themselves. Riker doesn't just call them biased, he refers to them as star chambers.
And the use of the term star chamber is highly specific and historically loaded.
Right, give us some context on that.
Sure. So for context, the Star Chambers was an English court of law that sat at the Royal Palace of Westminster from the late 15th century to the mid-17th century.
Okay.
Initially, it was set up to ensure the fair enforcement of laws against socially prominent people who might otherwise evade justice. But over time, because its proceedings were closed to the public and its records were sealed, it devolved.
As secret courts tend to do.
Right. It devolved into a symbol of ultimate oppression, arbitrary power, and the complete denial of due process. Riker is deliberately invoking that dark history.
Because he argues that modern UK family courts operate in the exact same Kafkaesque reality.
Yes.
He points to a deeply troubling statistic to back this up, too. 92% of emergency custody orders go to mothers.
92%.
92%. Now, if you wanted to investigate why that number is so astronomically skewed, you can't. And the mechanism protecting this secrecy, according to the book, is a specific statute, Rule 12.75.
Let's unpack the mechanics of Rule 12.75, because this is where Riker argues the true systemic corruption lies.
Yeah, break that down for us.
Rule 12.75 essentially allows a family court judge to completely seal court records and bar the public or the press from examining the proceedings.
Total blackout.
Total blackout. And the threshold for invoking this rule is shockingly low. If a mother claims that the proceedings are causing her, quote, undue emotional stress, the judge can drop the veil of secrecy over the entire case.
It's an incredible analogy to think about. If Rule 12.75 seals the records whenever the mother merely claims stress, the judge is literally the dealer at a casino putting a giant opaque screen up so nobody at the table can see that he's dealing from the bottom of the deck.
That's a great way to visualize it.
How is that due process? Riker argues this effectively hides massive due process violations from public scrutiny. It turns a courtroom, which is supposed to be based on empirical evidence, into a subjective game of he said, she cried.
And within that sealed environment, Riker believes the very act of fatherhood is being criminalized. He cites a deeply concerning study from the Cambridge Family Law Institute.
What did they find?
They found that 78% of judges implicitly view fathers primarily as financial providers, essentially ATMs with legs, rather than as equal, vital emotional caregivers for their children.
ATMs with legs. God.
The overarching argument is that maternal custody is the absolute default, and fathers enter the courtroom already presumed guilty of being unfit. They have to prove they aren't monsters just to get supervised alternating weekend visits.
And the specific case studies he provides to illustrate how this plays out behind those closed doors are just absurd. I mean, chillingly absurd.
Yeah, they really are.
There's the case of a British father who was literally jailed for 28 days. His crime: giving his daughter a birthday card.
A physical greeting card.
Yes, it was a glitter-coated unicorn card that simply said, "Love you to the moon." That's it. But because the mother had secured a draconian non-molestation order that prevented the father from communicating with the child, a family court judge ruled that sending this unicorn card constituted severe emotional manipulation.
So a man sits in a jail cell for nearly a month for acting like a father.
Exactly. And Riker shows how this punitive mindset extends into digital surveillance as well. He breaks down the mechanics of Rule 37.10,
Right.
which allows judges to label almost any online speech or social media activity as psychological warfare if the mother claims it upsets her. One father spent £5,000 in legal fees fighting a harassment charge because he posted a sarcastic SpongeBob SquarePants meme on his private Facebook page.
A SpongeBob meme.
He posted a meme about the Krusty Krab, comparing Mr. Krabs' exploitative business practices to the extractive nature of the family court system.
Oh my goodness.
His ex-wife's lawyers found it, claimed it was targeted harassment, and he lost his custody weekends over a cartoon meme. Meanwhile, Riker contrasts this microscopic scrutiny of men with the overwhelming leniency shown to women. He details a case where a mother retained primary custody of her children despite having 3 recent DUI convictions.
3 DUI.
3. The judge's rationale was that her driving a Honda Civic under the influence was somehow less of a threat to the children's well-being than the father's, quote, demonstrable anger over the custody situation.
That is the definition of institutional asymmetry.
There's another dad who was penalized and had his visitation reduced because he microwaved chicken nuggets for his kid's dinner.
You're kidding.
Nope. The mother's lawyer successfully labeled this as covert abuse via culinary humiliation, arguing it proved he was incapable of providing a nurturing environment.
What Riker is painting here is a landscape where the rules simply do not apply equally.
At all.
The threshold for male guilt is microscopic. A meme, a microwave dinner. While the threshold for female accountability is incredibly high, almost insurmountable, even in the face of criminal behavior like multiple DUIs.
When you lay out the mechanics like that, the financial extraction and the secretive courts, you realize that this presumption of male guilt doesn't just spontaneously generate in the family court waiting room.
No, it doesn't.
Riker argues that it is baked into the very foundation of how our modern institutions handle gender. He forces the reader to look outward, to see how domestic disputes and campus accusations are fundamentally structured by these captured institutions.
Yeah, he traces the roots of this rigged game back to the ideological capture of law enforcement and education. And this is vital to his argument.
Why is that?
Because he insists that concepts like the presumption of innocence, the right to confront your accuser, and objective cross-examination were foundational to Western civilization. A civilization, he notes, was built primarily by men, by the way.
Right.
And he claims that these foundations have been deliberately dismantled.
Which brings us to a major target of his critique, the Duluth model. He refers to the Duluth model as a brainless tumor of feminist policymaking.
Harsh words.
Very. Let's dig into the mechanics of this. What exactly is the Duluth model, and how does it dictate what happens when a police officer responds to a domestic dispute?
So the Duluth model is the most widely adopted approach to domestic violence interventions in the United States. And its influence has spread globally since it was developed in the 1980s in Duluth, Minnesota.
Okay.
What is critical to understand, and what Riker finds so deeply problematic, is the underlying theoretical framework of the model.
Which is?
The Duluth model explicitly defines domestic violence not as an individual behavioral issue or a toxic dynamic between two flawed people, or even the result of substance abuse or mental illness.
How does it define it then?
It defines domestic violence exclusively as an expression of male patriarchal entitlement.
Whoa.
Yeah. The entire curriculum is built on the premise that domestic abuse is an exertion of male power and control over women, rooted in societal patriarchy.
So the theory itself bakes the gender of the perpetrator into the very definition of the crime.
Exactly.
By definition, under this model, a woman cannot be the primary aggressor in a systemic way because she lacks the patriarchal power to enforce it.
Precisely. Riker argues that because modern law enforcement is heavily trained on the Duluth model, the outcome of a police intervention is predetermined before the squad car even arrives at the house.
They've already made up their minds.
The responding officers are trained to view the man as the aggressor by default. The mechanics of the model dictate that even if the man is the one who called 911, the police must look for ways in which his coercive control forced the woman to react.
Riker uses some terrifying imagery from actual police body cam footage to show how this ideology overrides objective physical evidence.
Yeah, that part was hard to read.
He describes a 2022 case from Minnesota. The body cam shows a father who is handcuffed to a hospital bed. His face is smashed in, and he is actively bleeding from a deep gash on his forehead. The wound was inflicted by his wife using the heel of a stiletto shoe.
Physical evidence is undeniable.
Absolutely undeniable. The wife, who literally has his blood under her fingernails, is standing in the room casually chatting with the officer. She's completely uncuffed.
Wow.
And the police officer, instead of arresting the person who committed the assault, actually laughs while reading the mandatory arrest policy to the bleeding father.
He laughs.
He jokes, "Equal rights mean equal left hooks, buddy."
It is a visceral, horrifying example of what Riker views as ideological enforcement rather than law enforcement. The policy, driven by the Duluth model's assumptions, dictates the arrest of the male, completely regardless of the physical, forensic evidence of who was actually attacked.
And he traces this exact same ideological capture to the education system. He doesn't mince words. He refers to modern university campus tribunals as feminist gulags.
Feminist gulags.
He looks at Title IX, the federal civil rights law in the U.S. that prohibits sex-based discrimination in any school or any other education program that receives funding from the federal government. Riker argues that over the last decade, Title IX has been completely weaponized into a system of kangaroo courts.
Let's look at the mechanics of these campus tribunals.
Please do.
Riker cites data showing that an astonishing 93% of Title IX accusations end in sanctions against the male student.
93%.
93. Furthermore, research from Stanford Law reveals that when male students attempt to appeal these decisions, they win their appeals 80% less often than female students who appeal sanctions.
But how are these tribunals actually structured? Because they aren't real courts, right?
No, they are not.
Yeah.
And that's exactly Riker's point. He points out that the Title IX administrators leading these investigations and hearings are rarely trained judges or legal professionals who understand the rules of evidence.
Right.
He describes them as DEI commissars with grievance studies degrees. In Riker's view, these administrators are financially and ideologically incentivized to convict.
So they have a quota to meet.
Essentially, yeah, they need high conviction rates to maintain their federal funding, justify their exorbitant salaries, and prove that they are actively combating the rape culture they claim is pervasive.
The erosion of objective reality in these settings is wild. I mean, the burden of proof is lowered from beyond a reasonable doubt to a mere preponderance of the evidence, which basically means 51% certainty.
Slightly more likely than not.
He mentions a college student who was formally investigated for sexual harassment simply for quoting historical language verbatim while reading Huckleberry Finn aloud during a literature class.
You kidding?
Nope. The context didn't matter. The subjective offense taken by a female classmate triggered the full weight of a Title IX investigation.
And the financial fallout from this lack of due process is becoming massive. Riker brings up the James Doe case against the University of Michigan.
Right, the $2.5 million settlement.
Yes, a male student sued the university after he was expelled based on an accusation. During the Title IX investigation, he was completely denied the right to cross-examine his accuser, and the university withheld exculpatory evidence.
Unbelievable.
When actual federal courts review these campus procedures, they frequently find egregious violations of due process. But Riker argues the damage is already done. The man's reputation and education are destroyed.
But let me push back on Riker's framing here again. I want to bring up a specific statistic he cites himself from the Duluth Police Department's own records.
Okay, let's hear it.
He notes that 76% of dual arrests where both parties are initially taken in end with the charges against the women just quietly disappearing while the men are prosecuted. Now, a mainstream legal analyst would argue that this is just prosecutorial discretion or perhaps a lack of corroborating evidence to convict the woman.
Right.
How exactly does Riker connect dropped charges in a local Minnesota county to a massive, overarching Marxist or feminist capture of the state? Isn't he seeing a conspiracy where there is just bureaucratic inefficiency?
That is exactly the counter-argument, but Riker rejects the idea of bureaucratic inefficiency completely.
How so?
If we look at the underlying mechanics of his philosophy, Riker argues that Marxist and feminist ideologies fundamentally view society entirely through the lens of oppressor versus oppressed classes.
Okay.
In this ideological framework, men as a demographic are universally categorized as the oppressor class and women as the oppressed class. Therefore, when institutions are captured by this ideology, their internal mechanics are literally rewired to never hold the oppressed accountable, while heavily disproportionately policing the oppressor.
So the outcome is the feature, not the bug.
Exactly. Riker argues that the 76% of dropped charges isn't a failure of the system's ability to gather evidence. It is the ideology functioning perfectly.
It's doing its job.
It is the state actively protecting the designated victim class and criminalizing the designated oppressor class, entirely regardless of the individual facts of the domestic dispute.
When you stack all of this up, the financial ruin of the marriage plantation where your assets are extracted, the devastating loss of your children in secretive star chamber courts, the destruction of your reputation and education through Title IX tribunals where you can't even cross-examine your accuser.
It's overwhelming.
It culminates in an unimaginably heavy psychological toll. When men lose everything and realize the system will offer them no recourse, it pushes them into a profound abyss.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the data Riker presents on mental health, and frankly, the darkest portion of his entire book, the silent epidemic of male suicide.
It is a harrowing read. And Riker forces the reader to look at the blood on the hands of these institutions. He draws a direct, incontrovertible causal line between family court outcomes and the skyrocketing May's suicide rate.
What's direct line?
He insists forcefully that these deaths are not the result of generic mental illness or a lack of male emotional communication, but are cases of direct, state-induced trauma.
He provides a deeply unsettling historical timeline to prove the correlation. He notes that the massive spike in male suicide didn't happen in a vacuum. After no-fault divorce laws began rolling out across the West, starting around 1969, male suicides jumped a staggering 312% by 1985.
312%.
The correlation is impossible to ignore. He cites a highly detailed study from The Lancet proving the financial lethality of these court orders. They found that for every 1% hike in mandated alimony payments, there is a corresponding 2% surge in male suicides in that specific jurisdiction.
And he delves into the biological markers of this trauma, which I found fascinating from a clinical perspective.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Riker claims that when researchers measure the cortisol levels, the primary stress hormone in men who have recently lost custody battles and have been alienated from their children, those cortisol levels exactly match the levels found in military prisoners of war.
That POW comparison is haunting.
It is. But it is crucial to understanding the mechanics of what the family court does to a human being. Think about the psychological mechanics of a prisoner of war.
Okay.
A POW is entirely stripped of their autonomy. They're subjected to an arbitrary, hostile, and absolute authority. They are isolated from their family and support systems, and they are locked in a state of perpetual, helpless anxiety, never knowing when the rules will change or when they will be punished.
God.
Riker argues that this is the exact psychological environment the family court system engineers for a father when it forcibly severs his access to his own children and garnishes his wages under threat of imprisonment.
The story he tells of Major James Henderson is absolutely gut-wrenching.
It's awful.
Major Henderson was a highly decorated Afghan war veteran. This is a man who survived multiple IED blasts in an active war zone. He possessed an incredible level of psychological resilience, but he could not survive the UK family court.
The enemy he faced at home was insidious.
According to the book, his ex-wife weaponized the concept of parental alienation. Through a series of false allegations and delayed hearings enabled by the sluggish, biased court system, she successfully erased his parenting time for 37 months straight.
Over 3 years.
For over 3 years, this combat veteran was legally barred from seeing the children he loved, while simultaneously having his military pension aggressively garnished to support the woman keeping them from him. Major Henderson ultimately hung himself in a Travelodge bathroom.
It's an absolute tragedy.
And what adds incredible insult to this fatal injury, according to Riker, is the bureaucratic cruelty that happens after the fact. When the coroner filed the report on Major Henderson, they listed his cause of death as generic personal issues or depression.
Which entirely erases the mechanism of his death.
Exactly. It erases the role the state played in manufacturing his despair. The court system drives a man to suicide, and the medical system covers it up by blaming his brain chemistry.
Right.
Meanwhile, the very same court that systematically denied him access to his kids immediately awarded his ex-wife his full military survivor benefits after his death. She profited from the suicide she helped induce.
Riker points out that this systemic bureaucratic erasure is exactly why the dead man switch movement has quietly emerged online.
The dead man switch, that sounds dystopian.
It's a terrifying phenomenon. Fathers who realize they're at the end of their rope are utilizing decentralized technology. They are uploading heavily encrypted files containing all the records of their custody battles.
Like what kind of records?
The biased judicial rulings, the ignored exculpatory evidence, the bank statements showing their financial devastation, the transcripts of their desperate pleas to see their kids.
Wow.
They set these files on a dead man's switch, programmed to automatically decrypt and mass email to journalists and public forums if the father fails to log in and reset the timer.
Meaning, if he dies by suicide.
Meaning if he dies. It is a grim, desperate, final attempt to force accountability from beyond the grave when the courts have silenced them alive.
It's incredibly dark, and Riker does a brilliant job describing the mechanics of the behavioral catch-22 that traps these men in the courtroom. Going back to Rule 12.73, he points out that the rules literally allowed judges to dismiss a man's testimony for being too emotional.
Right.
I mean, think about the psychological torture of that. Riker says the system routinely pathologizes male stoicism. If you sit there calmly while your kids are taken away, the judge notes in the record that you display uninvolved parenting or a lack of empathy.
But if you break down,
Right. If you cry, if you raise your voice, if you beg the judge to let you see your kids, the opposing counsel immediately labels you as emotionally unstable, erratic, and a potential danger.
you can't win.
You are canonized for being stoic, and you are disqualified if you show emotion. It's like watching a matador constantly moving the bull's horns.
Matador.
You charge at the red cape of be more emotional, and you get stabbed. You stand still, you get stabbed. The game is meticulously designed to exhaust, disorient, and ultimately slaughter you.
That matador analogy is spot on for how Riker portrays the judicial landscape. The system exhausts the target before moving in for the kill.
Yeah.
But this is the major pivot in the book. Riker doesn't write this to wallow in victimhood. He doesn't want men to just stand in the ring and take the sword. This entire grim reality is merely the setup for his aggressive, highly actionable escape plans.
Exactly. This is where the book shifts gears entirely. It goes from a depressing autopsy of a captured system to a hardened battle manual for surviving it. He calls these strategies legal judo and reproductive sovereignty.
Let's start with the legal judo.
Let's do it.
Riker wants men to weaponize the system's own massive bureaucracy against itself. He is a massive advocate for radical, uncompromising documentation.
Right.
He argues that men's default state of trusting the system is their greatest vulnerability. For instance, he breaks down the mechanics of the UK's single-party consent recording laws, specifically the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000, or RIPA. This law means you can legally record any conversation as long as you are a participant in it, without ever needing the other person's permission or knowledge. Riker tells his readers to stop walking into their homes or into court blindly.
He gives incredibly specific tactical advice.
Very tactical. He advises every man entering a divorce or a turbulent relationship to buy a 30-pound hidden tie clip recorder.
A tie clip recorder.
Yes. He tells them to run apps on their phones constantly and to use AI transcription services like Otter.ai to permanently document every whispered threat, every contradictory statement made by their spouse, and even to secretly record the judicial bias during closed-door hearings.
He uses the example of a guy named Dave who was a blue-collar electrician.
Oh, Dave's story is incredible.
Dave's wife called the police and claimed he violently hit her during a heated argument in their kitchen. In the Duluth model framework we discussed, Dave is going to jail. Right?
Without a doubt.
The police arrive, the woman is crying, the accusation is made. But Dave had the presence of mind to immediately pull his Amazon Alexa audio logs.
The smart home devices.
Yes. Because Alexa is constantly listening for a wake word, it often records snippets of background audio. Dave pulled the data, and the recording proved with a timestamp that during the exact minute of the alleged brutal assault in the kitchen, Dave was actually in the garage, loudly singing along to a Taylor Swift song.
A Taylor Swift song saved him.
The audio data completely neutered the false accusation. The police couldn't arrest him because the digital alibi was mathematically verifiable. It saved him from a criminal record and from losing his kids.
The Riker is quick to point out the ultimate injustice of the system here.
Which is?
Dave's wife faced absolutely zero perjury consequences or charges for making the malicious false claim.
Of course not.
The system protects the accuser, but Dave's defense worked. He survived the encounter through technological judo.
Now, here is where Riker takes his philosophy to an entirely different, incredibly radical level. He introduces a concept he calls the reproductive industrial complex.
Yeah, this is where it gets
Riker views human biology, romance, and reproduction entirely through the cold, calculated lens of financial risk management.
Yes. He approaches female fertility the way a ruthless hedge fund manager approaches a highly volatile, toxic asset class. He argues that the legal reality is stark. Men have absolutely zero reproductive rights post-conception. A man has no legal say in whether a pregnancy is kept or terminated.
True.
However, if a child is born, the state will aggressively enforce 100% of the financial liability onto the man for the next 18 to 21 years. Because the post-conception legal landscape is entirely captured, Riker argues men must exert absolute, uncompromising control pre-conception.
The economics he lays out to justify this are wild. He cites a study from Johns Hopkins University showing that men who get vasectomies see a 30% bump in their lifetime earnings compared to men who become fathers.
30%.
The math is simple. Without the massive financial drain of children, and without the vulnerability of being trapped in a marriage plantation for fear of losing access to those children, A man's wealth compounds exponentially.
Yeah.
So Riker advises his readers point blank, go get a $1,000 vasectomy tomorrow. Eliminate the biological vector of attack.
But he recognizes that men might still want children eventually, just on their own terms. So he outlines the mechanics of offshore fertility.
Offshore fertility.
He advises men to get the vasectomy, but to first cryostore their sperm in a jurisdiction totally outside the reach of Western family courts.
He specifically suggests the Cayman Islands.
Yes, because of the legal firewall. He notes that storing genetic material in the Caymans costs about $79 a year.
That's cheaper than Netflix.
Right. But the crucial mechanism is that the Cayman Islands do not enforce UK or US family court judgments regarding paternity or child support. By moving his genetic material offshore, a man guarantees that absolutely zero surprise paternity judgments can ever be financially enforced against him by a captured Western court.
He also pushes for the use of incredibly aggressive, lawyer-proof postnuptial agreements. He outlines contracts with mandatory, randomized paternity test clauses and strict, financially ruinous infidelity clauses.
And they work, apparently.
He claims Cambridge data shows that couples who sign these hardcore postnups actually see their divorce rates slashed by 40%. Why? Because the contract introduces hard, unavoidable accountability. It removes the financial incentive for the woman to initiate a frivolous divorce.
Exactly.
But let me pause here because this is where the listener might be reeling. Riker is advising men to, quote, guard your swimmers like they're Bitcoin private keys.
It's a quote that sticks with you.
That is an incredibly extreme way to live your life. I have to ask, is he advocating this as genuine, literal financial advice that he expects men to follow? Or is this more of a philosophical, rhetorical boycott of modern romance meant to shock the reader?
It is not rhetorical. He is absolutely advocating this as literal, practical, everyday advice. In Riker's worldview, romance in the modern legal framework is nothing more than a liability audit.
A liability audit.
He believes the risk matrix is completely broken. The statistical probability of facing a false accusation under Title IX, or experiencing paternity fraud, or being subjected to a financially ruinous divorce in a Star Chamber court is so unacceptably high that men must treat their genetic material and their assets with military-grade security.
It's a complete permanent paradigm shift from seeking romance to executing risk mitigation.
Treating biology like Bitcoin.
Treating biology like Bitcoin. It's a jarring concept, but honestly, it leads perfectly into the final massive culmination of his entire book. If the system is rigged, if the courts are captured, if your biology is a liability.
Riker's ultimate solution is to stop playing the game entirely.
Which brings us to the macro strategy. He delves deeply into the mechanics of MGTOW men going their own way and outlines what he terms the masculine strike.
His playbook for starving the beast is fascinating, and he tackles it from both a micro and a macroeconomic level.
Start with the micro.
He starts at the micro level, looking at where the average man wastes his energy, his focus, and his resources. He specifically targets what the internet calls the simp economy.
Right, the digital commodification of male attention.
Exactly. He points out that millions of guys are spending $20, $50, $100 a month on OnlyFans subscriptions or tipping Twitch streamers.
Essentially freely funding the very hypergamous, extractive system that ultimately despises and oppresses them.
Right. And Riker runs the cold, hard math on this. He tells the reader, take that $20 a month, cancel the porn, take back your attention, invest that $20 consistently in an index fund at a 10% return, and you have thousands of dollars extra in a decade.
It's about starving the system of your capital and compounding it for yourself.
And he brilliantly ties this financial advice back to human biology. He cites research from the University of Texas that studied the endocrine response to rejection.
Oh, this part was wild.
The study found that when men experience romantic or social rejection, their bodies trigger a 17% surge in testosterone.
17%.
Riker's philosophy flips the script on modern therapy here. He argues that getting rejected by a woman or getting served divorce papers shouldn't lead to a depressive spiral or a trip to a therapist to talk about your feelings.
What does he say it should lead to?
He says that spike in cortisol and testosterone is chemically priming the male body for war. It is an evolutionary signal to conquer.
He tells men to take that raw biological drive, stop wasting it on pixelated fantasies or seeking female validation, and funnel 100% of that aggression into building wealth and constructing parallel structures.
Which brings us to the macro level of his counterstrike, the digital nomad escape hatch.
Let's talk about that. This is where Riker's background in international finance really shines. He argues that the ultimate unbreachable defense against a hostile, captured legal system is total location independence and financial obfuscation.
He walks the reader, step by step, through the mechanics of legally disappearing.
Literally.
He explains the process of securing Estonian e-residency. Apparently, you can complete the process online in about 18 minutes, and it allows you to incorporate a business within the European Union entirely tax-free on reinvested profits.
But the key is layering.
Layering.
You have the Estonian front while running your actual day-to-day operations through an anonymous LLC registered in a jurisdiction like Belize or Nevis.
He calls this strategy capturing the VPN premium.
The VPN premium.
He cites economic data showing that remote male workers who untether themselves from corporate HR departments consistently out-earn traditional office workers by 23%.
That's massive.
By living in a low-cost, high-quality jurisdiction like Thailand, Colombia, or Dubai, and earning in US dollars or cryptocurrency, you achieve two things simultaneously.
Which are?
You starve the Western tax base that funds the captured institutions, and you make yourself virtually subpoena-proof.
He gives an incredible, almost comedic example of a guy who executed this perfectly. The man was dragged into divorce court in the UK. On paper, he listed his official occupation as a professional kiteboarder.
A professional kiteboarder.
He showed the judge minimal local income, maybe $28,000 a year from sponsorships. The judge, eager to extract wealth, awarded the ex-wife 15% of that meager income.
Which is practically nothing.
Right. But what the court couldn't see and couldn't touch was that his actual wealth, hundreds of thousands of dollars in SaaS software revenue, was flowing entirely untouchable through a Belize LLC and held in cryptocurrency.
Wow.
The guy paid his tiny court-mandated pittance and celebrated the divorce by buying a jet ski in Phuket. It's a complete systematic circumvention of the system.
And Riker is looking at cutting-edge technology to solidify this circumvention on a societal level. It's not just about individual escape, it's about building a parallel infrastructure. He talks extensively about forming decentralized systems. For example, he proposes the creation of a father-coin DAO.
Explain the mechanics of a DAO for the listener, because it's crucial to understand how it defeats the courts.
Right. A DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization. It exists entirely on the blockchain, governed by smart contracts rather than a CEO or a board of directors.
Okay.
Riker envisions a DAO designed to anonymously crowdfund massive legal defense war chests for fathers who are trapped in brutal custody battles. Because the DAO is decentralized and runs on crypto, the funds cannot be frozen by a UK family court judge.
That's genius.
Furthermore, the feminist NGOs or media outlets that usually try to dox and ruin anyone supporting men's rights cannot track the donors. The financial power is mathematically shielded from state interference.
He is pushing for the construction of an entirely parallel society that doesn't need permission from the state. He points to media companies like the Daily Wire and their Canceled Men campaign,
which successfully took the cultural backlash against cancel culture and monetized it into a massively profitable parallel entertainment industry.
Exactly. And technologically, he advocates for moving all communication and organizing away from captured platforms like Twitter or Facebook and building on the Nostr protocol.
Nostr?
Nostr is a decentralized network based on cryptographic keys.
Nay.
Because there is no central server and no corporate CEO, it makes censorship mathematically impossible. It ensures that men's voices, their data, and their strategies can never be deplatformed by Silicon Valley trust and safety teams.
It's all about building systems that the current regime simply cannot touch.
Okay, looking at all these strategies, I have a final strategic question for you. Throughout the book, Riker talks about aggressive legal warfare. He advocates suing captured institutions like taking the universities to federal court over Title IX violations with the stated goal to sue them until they're woke and broke.
Right.
But simultaneously, his ultimate endgame seems to be advising men to move their assets into untraceable Monero crypto, start offshore LLCs in Belize, and literally leave Western civilization behind. How do these two completely different strategies, fighting the institutions head-on in their own courts versus starving them by opting out and fleeing, coexist in his philosophy?
It's an excellent observation, and it comes down to a bifurcated, two-pronged strategy based on a man's current situation.
Elaborate on that.
The legal judo, the aggressive lawsuits, the Otter.A recordings, the RIPA 2000 traps. That is the tactical manual for the men who are already caught behind enemy lines.
The ones currently in the system.
Right. These are men who are currently trapped in the marriage plantation, who have children they are desperately fighting for right now. They cannot flee to Thailand. They have to fight in the muddy trenches of the family court.
So they use the system's rules to inflict maximum damage.
Exactly. But the macro strategy, the offshore LLCs, the vasectomies, the blockchain architecture, the digital nomad lifestyle, that is the long game. That is for the next generation of young men, or for the men who have cleanly exited the system. He believes you fight fiercely to bleed the current system dry of its resources in the courts, while simultaneously starving it of future tax revenue and building the parallel decentralized system that will eventually replace it.
Which brings us to the end of this incredible, exhaustive deep dive. We have explored Conrad Reicher's unapologetic, highly polarizing blueprint for men to navigate, survive, and ultimately completely bypass a legal and cultural system that he argues is fundamentally designed to extract their wealth and destroy their autonomy.
We've looked at the underlying mechanics of it all. We covered the brutal economics of alimony, the secretive star chamber nature of family courts, and Rule 12.75.
The ideological capture of title necks by the Duluth model.
The tragic quantifiable realities of state-induced male suicide.
And the extreme lengths some men are going to, from offshore sperm banks in the Caymans to blockchain DAOs to reclaim their lives.
As always, we want to remind you to like and subscribe to the show so you never miss a deep dive into the ideas shaping our world.
And if you want to explore the exact legal templates, the offshore business blueprints, and the uncensored data we discussed today, I urge you to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks to buy Bias Against Men, the English Court's Betrayal of Fairness.
And remember, you can follow the author, at Conrad Reicher, directly on Substack to see his ongoing work.
It is a profound piece of work. It's a book that demands a reaction regardless of where you stand on the political spectrum because the data it highlights cannot be easily dismissed.
Absolutely.
So I want to leave you, the listener, with a final lingering question based on the text. Riker points out a historical reality. Throughout history, men have overwhelmingly built and maintained civilization's actual physical and economic infrastructure.
Chat.
If his counterstrike succeeds, if a critical mass of top-earning, highly capable men take his advice, get vasectomies, permanently shift their wealth into the blockchain, and move their labor to offshore, parallel institutions.
What happens to the existing society they leave behind?
Does the murky, broken X-ray machine of our current captured system finally collapse under the crushing weight of its own extractive policies? Or does it, starved of the male resources and tax dollars it once endlessly relied upon, finally reform? It's something to think about. Until next time.